Welcome back and welcome to this session on continuing the digital trend. Joining me on the stage, I've got Joanne Harding, Executive Member of Adult Social Care from Trafford, and on screen we've got Martin Neal, Founder and CEO of iESE AI Limited, Simon Pike, Market Solutions Specialist at Netcall, and Kate Herr, Digital and Innovation Manager at Cumbria County Council. So just a bit of context for the session. It's not just about software, it is about digital and technology. It's a broader set of solutions that we're talking about here. In terms of sticking to the digital trend, it's not just about putting a digital front end on our existing business model. As we heard in the previous session on community enablement, actually we're talking about reinventing the way in which the authority works and the role of the authority and using digital to enable that. And of course, part of that means that digital implementation, whilst it's the role of the authority, means access to digital and use of digital within the community. So it's a broader context than simply a digital front end on an existing business model. So I'd like to start off with a question for all of the panel members, really, which is around the digital and technology tools that we've got and what currently is available to local authorities. What are the solutions? What are the track record of delivering those solutions we've got, and how do we manage that in a situation we're actually reinventing the council and don't necessarily know what we're building at this stage? So maybe Simon, I could ask you to kick off with a sort of view from Netcall about the technology rollout as you see it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from our perspective, the technology that's out there, there's a wide range. You can go for the likes of artificial intelligence, which I know Martin might touch on a little bit. You can talk about RPA and robot process automation, which is something that we can assist with in that extent. And then there's other platforms that might be off-the-shelf solutions that traditionally have been provided to local authorities and central government. And then you can talk about the likes of low-code or no-code technologies as well. There's a wide breadth of them out there. Personally, from a Netcall perspective, we think low-code is a good option out there if you think about it from a traditional perspective versus of buying, as I say, an off-the-shelf application or making a decision to code a system on your own and bringing the skill sets in, which there's a shortage of, as we know, around the country. One of those is very restrictive in terms of potentially an off-the-shelf application versus quite expensive in terms of a skill set. If you think about it from a Venn diagram perspective, and low-code sits quite nicely in the middle of that, where it's pre-coded, if you like, and using a drag-and-drop interface, but is flexible enough to allow you to do exactly what you want. So that's where we would sit with Netcall. And then obviously our recent acquisition of an RPA provider as well sits quite nicely on the side of that to help where you want to do repeated processes, really.
Brilliant. Martin, can I ask you to sort of say a bit from your perspective about the sort of technology that you're starting to engage with across local government?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen essentially is a convergence of need with capability. With the coronavirus really driving people remotely, everyone has become a remote worker, a Zoomer, an Amazon user. So the kind of experiences that citizens expect now have really leapt forward in a huge way from a digital perspective, and at the same time, our focus from an AI perspective is really taking the developments that the hyper vendors like Microsoft, who we work pretty closely with, who've spent billions and billions building out AI platforms that can be consumed at a low cost. And we've really fused those two things together. So our focus has been largely around citizen engagement using AI technologies to make it much easier for a wider range of people to deal much more naturally with systems. So that's the area that we see the greatest take up in terms of the quite a wide spectrum of AI capabilities that are out there, from machine learning through to vision and recognition. Far and away the thing that is moving most quickly is the use of conversational AI, really facilitating citizen engagement with council.
Yeah, and in terms of the use of AI, do you see that people are just taking that and just trying to apply and simplify and reduce cost of the existing process, or are they genuinely trying to do something new and use technology to support them on that journey?
I think, again, that the circumstances are really dictating that. The new change is citizens wanting to engage in a very different way, happening overnight. And how is that facilitated? And, how is it done in a way that is accessible? How is it done in a way that's inclusive? How is it done in a way that's ethical? All of those things are sort of critical factors in how any branch of government needs to deal with and engage with citizens. So I think for the most part, it's the huge take-up has been really driven by those sort of practical needs. The more outlandish, probably the wrong word, more esoterical branches of AI, we're not seeing anything like as much on the ground movement in. We see people doing occasionally projects, but people are so focused with dealing with the here and now and what technology can possibly help them do that more effectively. That tends to be what's driving it.
Brilliant, thank you. Kate, if I could bring you in, perhaps you could give us a flavour of the sorts of usages that you've had and you've been making and maybe where you see things going from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been using the Liberty Create Loco platform in Cumbria now for a couple of years, and we've had some really good successes with that. And as you said, it's not just about putting a digital front end onto a back office process. We've been looking at service redesign using that platform as well. So we've done that across a number of service areas before COVID. And we've had some good successes with that, and it's been fantastic for us as an authority in terms of the financial difficulties that we're facing, the fact that we're not, in Cumbria we're quite isolated. We don't have a big pool of talent to pull on in terms of some of the roles that we need to fill. And Loco has offered us a massive opportunity to do things more quickly and more flexibly with a very, very small team of people. I've only got a team of 4, but some of the systems we've built have saved the council, £250,000 already. So, that's been hugely effective for us. But I think particularly in COVID, that came to the fore. So we've been able to develop systems particularly quickly. So we've spun up a system for our vulnerable people. So in terms of food packages and pharmacy deliveries, we developed that in 5 days, rolled that out to district council partners. So it's kind of multi-agency work, and we worked with Sellafield Nuclear Fuels up in Cumbria as well on that project. And also we've been using it on the test and trace system, which we've been very successful with. So it's having massive successes in terms of how we can use that to do things differently, take a very different approach to what we're doing, and not just do online forms. It's whole system redesign across multiple partners that we've been able to deliver in Cumbria.
Yeah, so I'll just hold you there. So that was a working test and trace software application, was it?
Yeah, so working.
And did it cost 12 billion pounds, or was it a bit cheaper than that?
Well, it cost us nothing other than the staff development time. So we've not had to pay anything over and above our current existing contract with our software providers to do that. We built the system in 10 days. It's now got over 9,000 contacts stored in it, and in Cumbria we're tracing 97% of our contacts.
Brilliant. Well, that just goes to show that councils can, once again. Maybe we'll get you to run a national system next. Joanne, maybe from your perspective, if you give us a little bit of a flavour about your engagement with technology in your area, the sort of things that you've seen and the pluses and minuses of that.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm the member of the panel that comes with kind of least experience from a corporate digital offer, really. Speaking, as I did in the previous session, on community enablement, really. I think that, and from a social care point of view, that the use of digital technology has enabled people to stay at home safely and live independently, which is a great thing. I don't believe there is any replacement sometimes for that human contact, and I don't want us to go down a road that means, I know we talk about the new normal, and I don't necessarily like that expression, but I know that digital will play a huge part in how we move forward. But I think for me, the use of some of the apps has been brilliant. So we look at some of the mental health apps that allow people to practice mindfulness. There's been some apps that people can, like Samaritans have got on board, Shout, all of these organisations that have allowed people to connect when they've been in crisis. So from a community point of view, some fantastic innovation. I guess for me, the concern is how accessible some of this will be to our communities and how we manage to make it accessible.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really good point. So that's sort of a segue into sort of how the public use what it is we're developing. In terms of the systems that you've been developing, have you had sort of thinking about how the public engage and the level at which they need to engage with your systems at the front end, if you like? So tell us a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so, user-centred design is at the forefront of what we're trying to deliver in Cumbria, and it's not about shutting off other access channels either. What we're trying to do is use our resources better, so to free up the more expensive access channels for the really high value adding activity, and to try and divert some of that churn, if you want to call it that, onto channels that are cheaper and easier and more effective to run. And we're not about switching, and not enabling communities to use those systems. So the COVID-related stuff, to be fair, has been mostly kind of internal staff-based. It's not really been used as a public-facing in a public-facing way. But in terms of our other systems that we've developed, all of those have been developed with user feedback not even user feedback, users at the core of developing them. So it's not just about developing and asking it for feedback and asking people for feedback afterwards. It's about taking them with us on that journey so that the system is operating properly, and they're involved in every step of that process of development. And then we'll continue to do that as much as we possibly can. It's hard. It's really hard in a COVID world where we're not able to get out. We getting out into libraries and talking to people that were using libraries, and getting out in, just walking down the streets in the town centre and asking for people's input into things. Can't do that anymore. So it's harder to get some of that user feedback, but we're certainly looking at ways we can keep that going.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. So in terms of, we've got a question come in online. This is how big a role has digital web content played before compared to during the pandemic, and actually what do you think it'll mean after the pandemic? So are there any long-standing trends and changes that are going to happen as a result of that?
I think we've seen more traffic through our web pages, certainly. We've seen more people filling in online forms to access services. We've had to divert some of our resources away from answering phone calls for things like highways reporting. Those staff had to switch focus and look at vulnerable people. And actually what we found was that now that we've switched the phone lines back on, people are still using the online form for reporting potholes and not actually coming through on the phone lines anymore as much as they did before. So I think there's going to be a legacy of people using sort of digital tools to do what they need to do with us as an authority. And I think it's, what we need to do is make sure that they can do that as easily and as effectively as possible. So I think that will continue, and there's a very definite onus on us as an authority to make sure that we capitalise on that and make sure that online content and transactional services are as good as possible.
Maybe I can draw in Martin first and then Simon, and ask the same question, which is, in terms of your support to local authorities, what have you been up to in terms of ensuring that authorities can respond digitally to the pandemic? Martin, if you want to kick that off first.
Yeah, the particular situation that we are most proud of, in fact, happened with Cheshire West, where we had a digital assistant running on their website during the weekend of the first lockdown, 23rd of March. And we were looking at the stats on the following Monday, and there was a 600% spike in requests that came in over that period. And it was obviously the bot was providing an awful lot of that, but a part of the spike was because that the Cheshire West had decided that they could take their contact team and use them for outbound calling. For vulnerable people who were shielding, to give them, the advice that, wasn't pretty widespread at that time. So that was an absolutely fantastic example of the technology being able to provide a certain type of service, and the way humans can interact around that. And we also see that sort of the Southampton City Council, just sort of picking up on what Kate was saying a little earlier, in terms of how enduring this technology is likely to be. We are currently answering 96% of the inbound queries coming in digitally, 94% of which is we have independently been judged as correct answers. So, that's a huge benefit, particularly out of hours, particularly over weekends, particularly in times when there are spikes. So, I see the technology as providing a really useful function, working in conjunction with the existing teams, allowing them to deal with, more human issues, more sensitive issues, whilst improving the quality of service to citizens and residents.
So fascinating. The ability to deal with that kind of scale of spike is phenomenal. Simon, can you say a little bit from your perspective about how you've been supporting authorities to respond to those extra demands?
Yeah, certainly. I think the thing for us was the need to be responsive quickly, really, as a software supplier, but also in supporting our customers. And I think we were in quite a good position with the use of the Loco platform that we have, that allowed our customers to develop applications really, really quickly. Kate's team at Cumbria with their test and trace, or the track and trace, system that they built was, really rapid in its bringing it to fruition and being launched and used. And around the country, across our customers and with us ourselves, writing applications, I think we created somewhere in the region of about 12 applications that could be used on their own to help support authorities deal with the pandemic. And that's everything from managing household waste recycling centres when they reopened, right up to the track and trace that they had at Cumbria, or dealing with employee health and welfare checks, making sure their staff were okay, as well as dealing with things like PPE distribution and volunteer coordination for delivery of services to vulnerable people. And that came down to the fact that our technology was flexible enough to support them and working in that way. It's very easy to get on board with that and to start to design an application and get it through to fruition. And with support from us and our Netcore community, all 12 of those applications are available to anybody using our platform. And that's the ethos that we like to follow. So
effectively, you've got a kind of app store where another council can see what Kate's developed and draw that down and use that locally. Is that the model?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We call it our Netcore community app share, because we don't charge for it. So it's there and available for anybody using our platform to access and download those applications and tailor those to the way in which they want to work, if they want to work slightly differently, or indeed use it as is out of the box, so to speak.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. We've got a variety of questions coming in. I'll pick one off just to start with. So we've got about, will the continuing digital trend bring about more opportunities for direct forms of democracy? Maybe as our one elected member, Joanne, I can ask you that one first.
It's an interesting question, really, opportunities for direct forms of democracy. I think one of the key things we need to do, and Kate made reference to this before, was about how we engage people in what we develop. So, for example, in Trafford, I chair the Age Well board, and we've recently put a shout out for our Ageing Well champions, or older people's voices, and developed a job description and a role, if you like. We want older people to be our eyes and ears in our communities to help shape services, feed into consultations, develop policy. But there is a very real fear around digital connection in some of our older people. I don't want that to be a sweeping generalisation, because the strapline for International Day of Older People was valuable, not vulnerable. And I think that's absolutely brilliant, because the age profile for some of our volunteers are older people. But I think if we are developing systems and apps, we need to make sure that we're asking people, well, what would work for you? Yep. And certainly for older people, and again, the work of the suicide board that we're doing, we're trying to engage with people to say, what would remove some of that fear? What would make it easier for you to use? And what do you want from an app? So we have to remove some of the corporate side of things if we're genuinely doing community.
Yeah. That sort of co-design that's obviously now a challenge that Kate was talking about. Certainly one of the ones that I know and love is the Mind of My Own app, which allows vulnerable children to have a voice. And actually that's been flying off the shelves, I know, between in the pandemic, because it means that councils have been able to have that continuing conversation with children at a time when they most need it, when they're least able to get to it. And so I think there has certainly been some digital trends that allow access, allow participation in that broader sense. So it's great to see that being adopted. One for you here, Kate. We had a great bit of praise. So it's remarkable to hear how Kate and her team have managed to build and deploy functioning apps in such a short amount of time. What can other councils learn from your approach to digital?
I think it's taken us some time. You know, this isn't overnight. I've been plugging away at this for probably 4 or 5 years now. And what we've got what's worked really well for us in Cumbria is that because we're such a small team, we have to really quickly work to get the relationships with service areas, and we take them with us on this. So this isn't about us going out to a service area. We couldn't have done vulnerable people. We couldn't have done test and trace if we'd gone out, got a load of functional requirements, gone back, sat in a dark office or in our dark bedrooms or whatever, plugged away and done something, and then sort of presented it and gone, ta-da, here you go, folks, This is what it is. It wouldn't have worked. So what we do is we take people with us every step of the way. So that has worked particularly well through COVID. But, you know, vulnerable people was 5-day turnaround. Test and trace was 10-day turnaround. But we did daily stand-ups, we did daily sessions, we did daily feedback sessions with members of the service and the people that were going to be actually using the system, and they helped us to build it. So there was never a moment when they weren't involved in that process. And that's worked wonders for us, because it means that when we do launch the first phase of a product, it's never a finished product. We never go, here's the final article, over to you to use it. It's very much here's the first phase, please work with us to make it better. So we're still developing test and trace now. You know, we're building more and more functionality into it every day. But what's helped is that people have seen that process, they're part of that process, and they know that they can come to us and say, oh, could you just change that? And we'll say, do you know what, yeah, we can. And then they see it 2 hours later, then there's been a change, it's reacting to their feedback. So I think that's what's worked really well for us in Cumbria.
That's fantastic. Good. So give us a flavour. You said it's a small team. How many is a small team?
I've got a team of 4. 2 of those are more technical and I come from a kind of more of an IT background and do some of the more complex work within the platform in terms of working about integrations and APIs with other systems. And 2 of those are what you would have been business analysts in the old world. You know, they go and do business process re-engineering activity, but they're also builders. So Carl, I've got to give Carl credit for test and trace. He's not on here today, but Carl is a business analyst. He built test and trace on his own.
Brilliant. So one person, 10 days. And was that all he was doing? Was he doing other things at the same time?
He was also doing some highways related work, and he was also supporting the vulnerable people work. And they were also looking at doing a household waste recycling centre booking system. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Well done, Carl.
Yeah, well done, Carl.
So another question coming in is around the sort of whether or not people are hesitant to adopt digital processes in the fear of digital replacing jobs. I mean, that's an old question, so maybe I'll add another rider to that, which is, and do you think that's changed in the current environment? Maybe I'll kick off with Simon first on this one. What's your kind of feeling? What's your experience?
I mean, I've been involved in local government for a long time, and I think you're right. I think that's a bit of an old adage, isn't it? That there's a fear that new technology will do away with my job. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think what it does present is an opportunity to grow as an employee and to pick up new skills and to provide value in a different way. And I think if you have the right digital platform or technology to support you with that, then there's no end to what you should be able to achieve, really. And it's about working collaboratively. And I think Kate's right. It's about those people understanding that it's not about having something done to a service delivery team. It is about taking them with you. And also it's about working in an agile way. and that might be a bit of a change for people, but I think that's the way for the future. I think digital means that you've got to work agile. It means that you've got to, as I say, work collaboratively with the service providers to understand exactly how they work and what they work, and show them that actually they can end up with a better solution at the end of it.
Great, thanks. Martin, what's your take on that?
Yeah, you get a lot of this in the AI world. The most definitive study on this was done by McKinsey's, who looked at this globally from an AI perspective and essentially crunched the maths. They were looking at really significant increase in the size of the pie, as it were, and more roles coming out of it, which has been the way of all technology revolutions. People at the front end of them are concerned about the impact of them, and they collectively produce an increased pool. And from our perspective, that example that we gave at Cheshire West, that was essentially using people to do much more impactful, much more valuable functions, rather than answering the 60th person that day about what they can put in their blue bin.
Yep.
The other element of that is that something that we are introducing at the moment really takes the idea one step further, and that is that you take digital assistants, chatbots, and how much of what a council can they really do for you? Probably not much, 10% tops.
Yep.
The remaining 90% is happening with people, and will always happen with people. So, our focus with our new technology is really all about using the digital assistants to connect people up with other people, to understand what it can't do, to understand that this request is something that is, not appropriate for a bot to deal with, or not part of its skill set, too complex, and then to connect you up either through video or through phone or through web chat. And you get this essentially this notion of a kind of matrix of people working together with the digital technologies to give the best of both. And ultimately, the beneficiaries of that are going to be the residents and the citizens, who are getting a better service, getting it 24/7, etc.
So that's a really interesting journey. You mentioned earlier ethics, and we've had one of the questions come in, which is around if you're looking at AI or algorithms in the public sphere, how can you ensure that those don't promote a bias or entrench inequalities? So is that a real issue for you as you see it, or is that because you're not in the space that those particular algorithms work in?
Yeah, we operate across public sector, and our largest focus area is in local government. But we can get into quite a lot of different things across the AI stack. I think we were pretty early to providing digital assistance into local government, and our first project 2.5 years ago, we were suddenly faced with, okay, suppose somebody who is perhaps not well disposed towards the authority tries to subvert this assistant to do and say things that it shouldn't. How much fun would it be to trick the bot into saying something and then screenshotting it and sending it across Twitter? And how do we deal with that? How do we deal with people asking to do inappropriate things? Because it's the authority's brand that's out there that's embodied in this assistant. And the answer to that was we actually had to engineer it into our experience. So we have AI subsystems that run across 3 different groups every time somebody interacts with it, working out whether this is inappropriate, whether this is worrying, and then deals with it accordingly. So you can put those things in. I think what most people normally think about with ethics, however, is not that. It's typically bias in data. And we had a good example of how that can happen really easily. We were doing a machine learning project for Health Education England, looking at essentially at the propensity of success and so on with the students running through their system, and trying to find patterns of success, patterns of people who would benefit from more assistance. And we came up with this group that were seeming to be performing very badly. And, we were a little confused by it. They weren't missing out well. They seem to be conforming to a pattern of being, broadly female and broadly a certain age. And you dig into the data, and it's because they were pregnant. You've got this kind of dry analytics of the data. The data's telling you a certain thing. Understanding and thinking about, and always having at the forefront of your mind that embedded in that data, in whatever way it's been arrived at, is a bias. And often the critical factor in that is that you have a process. You have a process that seeks to understand that there's a risk of this, seeks to at regular points, identify and document the risk, communicates the risk, lets everybody aware of what the risks are, and then make decisions. I think that the danger comes where, those processes aren't in place, and you just sort of plow on and take the outcomes of it.
Interesting, very interesting. And obviously, in terms of what we're doing, we're not just talking about the software, we're actually going out into home setting environments, maybe looking after more vulnerable people to help them be more independent. And that's clearly something that's an emerging trend in the care area. Are there any lessons learned that you have, Joanne, in terms of how you're starting to support more vulnerable members in the community, and are there any ethics considerations in what you've been thinking about there?
So I think there's lots of lessons to be learned, and each day there's a new technology that comes along which keeps people safe. For example, we have at this current time, families not able to see loved ones because of shielded communities. So the use of technology when we have people who experience quite advanced dementia, who, for example, will go wandering. There are, different watches, things that can be placed in shoes, which can track and trace people as to where they are. So I think there's always advancements and developments which are brilliant. One of the things for me around health and social care is the way systems speak to each other, or should I say, don't speak to each other. Because all too often we have it where somebody will say, well, I've told my story once, and then I have to tell it again, and then I have to tell it to somebody else, when actually what we're trying to do is find a solution, but there are that many different systems, and the systems don't seem to speak to each other. So from somebody who isn't that tech savvy, I can see that a frustration that a resident would have. So we still haven't got that whole patient record system sorted. We still haven't got it where health and social care are joining up and speaking to each other. So for me, I think there's an ethical question about how we do that to make sure that the person isn't batted around like in a pinball machine, that eventually we find a solution that's the right one for them.
And that they actually control their own data. By they, I mean that the actual recipient of service or the resident actually controls their privacy and is confident that they control their privacy. I think so we've got a question that's come in, is about this data is playing an ever important role in ways which authorities analyse their communities. Are residents hesitant to share their personal data? And I think that certainly we're doing a project at the moment looking at a new way of managing care records. And in discussion with, we had the same problem as Kate in terms of co-design, but actually getting as many people involved as we could. The common thread on that was that currently, pre-pandemic, you've got a system which actually is internal. It holds those records. It has very little exposure to the end user, if you like. And actually what we want to do is actually throw that across the wall so they actually control it, and it becomes an app. And that actually they've got control of the records and they decide what's being exposed or not, and that's a fundamentally different approach. So I think there's some pretty good lessons in other countries. I know that across the European Union, some of the oldest personal records are the population registers in Scandinavia, and I did a job for the European Commission at the time, cross-analysing all the census in Europe. And I went to our own records office and was told, we'll come back in a year's time, we'll have processed the census data by then, and we'll be 80% accurate, but about 2 years out of date. and I went to the Swedish equivalent. They said, what day and what year do you want it for? We hold no personal records. They're all held locally, but I'll press a button and give you the census now. And that showed me that actually privacy doesn't mean lack of access to meaningful information, but also you can have meaningful information but leave control of personal data with the people that actually at the local level that own it. So certainly I think it's always held as a kind of a reason not to move forward, but there are, if we look for international best practice, some solutions out there. Also conscious that Trafford has done some good work in the past at working across sector, so health and care, but also looking at a single conversation, not just across the parts of the Trafford as a council, but your partners. And sometimes it's very difficult to even see the daylight gap between you and your partners. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, of course, as well, you know, part of Trafford is one of the local authorities as part of Greater Manchester. So when we have the devolved health and social care budget to Greater Manchester, looking at areas of innovation and communicating with each other, because, you know, we neighbour Manchester. Why should it be so difficult to be able to have a conversation when there's a border that 1 minute you're in Trafford, the next minute you're in Manchester? So there's been some work around how we work digitally with the health and social care, but also across Greater Manchester there are things like sharing back office, like star procurement, working in commissioning a bit differently, more intelligent commissioning, using the data to help us cross border. So there are some good examples across Greater Manchester, not just Trafford.
Yeah, great, brilliant. Kate, have you had any sort of experience of that discussion around personal privacy and whether that's held back any of your applications, or is it something you've hit yet?
It's not something we've hit, to be fair. It's something that we're aware of and trying to build into the process, but it's not something that we've encountered any difficulties with. I think we will do increasingly moving forward, the more services that we roll out. I think internally there's a drive to have a single customer record, which is extremely problematic. You know, if we've got multiple systems with multiple sources of people's data in it, and I think we'll be encountering some of those conversations as we start to explore whether that's something we want to pursue as an authority.
Yeah, okay. And Martin and Simon, have you seen anything in terms of any of your customers saying that personal privacy has been a barrier that's stopped them driving forward the development of applications? Maybe I can ask Simon first to comment.
Yeah, I mean, not specifically. I mean, I think, like Kate said, I think that it's something that's been talked about for some time in terms of privacy of data and access to that and who owns that data. And I think it's a symptom of the way local government have managed their software systems to some extent. This plethora of different systems, all with duplicated data, and therefore who really owns that, and whether it's achievable to get to that concept of a true golden record. I'd like to think it is. Being in the technology industry, I think there's ways in which we can support local authorities with that drive. But it's not holding any of our customers back as far as we're aware.
That's good to hear. I mean, I think that as we move forward in terms of technology penetrating the community and the applications like Internet of Things, that actually that's going to become more and more important that we keep on top of that. I think some of what I've seen in terms of authorities and how they've managed it, actually they've been really clear about. Actually, sometimes the customer engages me. I don't need to know who they are. Certainly one of our councils saying, well, we're doing something about someone reporting a pothole in the road. Actually, we just need to know where the pothole is. We don't need to know who reported it. And actually, we need to be clear about how we're dealing with it and how quickly. So I think that sometimes we can actually bring the problem into the situation when actually it could be removed if we take an appropriate level. Martin, anything from your perspective to add on that, on the personal privacy side? I know you've covered some of the ethics aspects.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a spectrum here, and essentially it's a bargain we make, isn't it? That, you know, the more of our personal information we give up, the richer the experience that we can expect from it, you know, assuming that's the way it operates. You know, so for example, I'm quite happy to let my Alexa devices know my music preferences because, you know, when I ask my playlist, I'm hoping I'm going to get a better selection, listen to something I'm going to hear. And I think the industry is behind the curve. You know, the initiatives that you were describing are exactly the things that the major hyper vendors and really the whole world is thinking about, which is how do you responsibly put the control back in the hands of the individuals, and how can you let them make that bargain in a more effective way? People whose life is going to depend, and life and well-being is going to depend on you understanding exactly how well they're feeling right now. That they're at the high end of the spectrum. If I'm gaining nothing from it, and I'm just being targeted by you for advertising in a way that I don't value, then I'm at the low end of the spectrum. And right now, because the tools don't exist to do this in a sophisticated way, we really end up back at process. In really answering your question, one of our clients is the ICO, and we work with them in implementing these and shortly in putting an assistant out for them. In the absence of a technological solution that doesn't exist right now, I think all you can really do is ensure that you have a process, within your organisation, that you're thinking about the data in a structured way, that you're not accidentally collecting data that you don't need to, and where you are collecting it, then you're handling it in a responsible way, and that's all we can do right now.
That's excellent, thank you. I mean, there's a sort of another question to come in that sort of partly relates. That's more around data standards, I think. But great to hear that platforms that work on an open data basis, an app sharing example is fantastic. How can we get some of the larger software providers in the market to change the way platforms work so we can be more effectively integrating systems and data, e.g. health data? So that's probably a question for Simon and Martin again, but do you think that's a question of systems integration, or is it a question of data standards and data integration? Simon, have you got anything that you'd like to say on that one?
I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, we know that central government talked about, I'm trying to think of the name of it now, it's gone out of my brain, the open standards of sharing information. Yep. And sharing development. And taking that approach and trying to be more open and encouraging software suppliers to work in that way. That's something that we've kind of bought into with our app share. In terms of integrations, I think that's about having the right data standards in place within your system and the right set of APIs available. And I think if those are available, then there's no reason why different systems shouldn't be able to talk to each other. But I do think you're right. I mean, there are certain areas of central government which are better, I think, at having data standards in place. If you take the education sector, for example, they're very keen on that type of approach because they have to be, because of all the returns that go to central government. You take some other areas of local government, that's perhaps less of a higher level. So I think there are things that can be done there to standardise some of those data items, and that would make it a bit easier to share data, certainly.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's actually, to be honest, it's an area where local government's got a very good track record. The fact that we have a unique property reference number for every property in the country is down to local authorities collaborative across England, Wales and Scotland creating the standards, making them into British standards and commissioning the support to actually develop that national and maintain that national data set. We've got just a couple of minutes to go, so maybe I'll just ask for each of you in turn for one final comment in terms of, we've had this digital and technology acceleration, I think, for the sounds of it, in terms of the pandemic. So any other final comments on where next or what we need to do next to continue that trend, make sure that we continue on the uptake? Kate, can I ask you to comment first?
Yeah, so I think it's a hard one. I've been battling with this one in terms of Cumbria. So we did really well during COVID, and I think what I'd like to do is take the learning from that. So everyone was focused on a goal, on a vision. There was no there wasn't over governance. There wasn't so much bureaucracy that it tied us in knots. We didn't have to go through several programme boards for decision making. It was just, we had to get on with it. And I think if we want to keep accelerating the kind of digital transformation, we need to take some of that learning and adapt it as our normal working practice. And we've talked about it, but I think the danger is that we drift back into our old working practices and things start to slow down again because you lose that momentum and that kind of adrenaline rush that you had in those kind of initial stages. So it's how we take some of that and embed that as a long-term way of working, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Joanne, would you echo that, or are there
Definitely,
other?
and I just think for me, one of the things we probably need to develop is an all-age digital buddy kind of system to remove some of the fear out there, because we need to use a digital platform to reduce social isolation. We know it's out there, it's huge, it's one way we can combat it, but in order to do that, we have to remove the fear, and I just think a digital buddy system like we've started to develop in Trafford, and I'm sure other areas have, we have to roll that out.
Brilliant, thank you. Martin.
Yeah, I think for all of its awful consequences that continue to roll on, the coronavirus has provided really a once in a generational opportunity where there's an appetite, amongst residents to engage in a certain way, and a technology that's available to do it. And I think picking up really on what Kate was saying, which is just trying to ensure that that you galvanise that into actions and change, rather than settling back.
Thank you for that. So in terms of the last comment, then Simon, I don't know whether you've got anything you wanted to say on the digital trends, and then I'll maybe wrap up.
Yeah, just to back up what Martin and Kate have said, really, I think there is a once in a lifetime opportunity here where we've been able to rethink the way in which we do service enablement, whether that be actual service delivery or digital provision to support a service delivery. And I think we've heard a lot about projects being implemented in a matter of weeks, which would otherwise have taken years.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real opportunity coming out of this. If there is a silver lining to the cloud, so to speak, that we can take that learning and go forward with that and go, actually, we don't need to do that full, going round and round and round and doing feasibility study after feasibility study to work out whether it's possible. And actually, if you grab it and run with it, and getting something in there is better than nothing. And actually, if you take that approach, and as we said earlier, taking the people with you, then I think there's some real good learning that we can take from what has been potentially a quite dark period.
Thanks, Simon. So it just remains for me to thank our guests, Joanne, Martin, Simon and Kate. Thanks for all of your input. Our next session is at 3 o'clock on public service adaptation to the virus. Just one other plug is that actually we are going to be doing a session on another date to announce around the lessons learned combined between Canada, the UK and Dubai as a minimum set, looking at actually some of the common lessons that Kate referred to. So look out on our website for that. And so again, see you at 3 o'clock. Cheers.